All right, we're going to go ahead and get started as people continue to trickle in. Greetings and welcome. I am Terry Roberts Leonard, and I have the honor to serve as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Carmel Clay Schools. I'm so thankful that you have chosen to spend some of your precious time with us today at the Courageous Conversations series. This is our last Courageous Conversations event for the calendar year of 2021. The Courageous Conversations series aims to inspire dialogue, community engagement, and civic education. Speakers will include scholars, community leaders, and diversity professionals whose scholarship, leadership, and advocacy enhance the school system's efforts to present diverse viewpoints, ideas, and perspectives to inspire greater understanding and appreciation for inclusive excellence. I am honored to be here today with Stephanie Whiteside, who is our mental health coordinator for Carmel Clay Schools. Our format today is that we're just going to have a conversation about this topic, right? And then we're going to share some important information. And we also have the Q&A feature on Zoom available. So if you have some questions that we have not covered or just questions as we go along, please feel free to utilize that Q&A feature. And we will get to as many of those questions as we can within our allotted time frame together. So let's start off by talking about why this topic is so important. So Stephanie, take it away.
Yeah, so this topic is very important to me because I get a lot of questions, and probably when it comes to questions from parents and caregivers and teachers, this topic is probably the question or the topic that I get the most questions about. And really it's on how to speak to children about those difficult topics. So either an incident or something has occurred, and now it's time for conversation. And sometimes it may be the child that's initiating that conversation. And I think sometimes it may be, more about where they're at developmentally, what age they are, what's appropriate to talk about, how to respond to some of that information. And I do think, especially with technology and social media, it's made it so that sometimes, especially for our teenagers, news gets to them much quicker than, so we don't really get much time to sit them down and talk with them before they are already aware of an event or an incident or something occurring. And often then we're having to respond to that. And really when we talk about these tough topics, there's a wide range of tough topics, right? And so what we do know is that, appropriate responses, supportive responses that are age appropriate can go a long way. I know that there's about, 112 children lose a parent every day. And that's not including the number that's losing close grandparents, that are losing pets, that are losing friends, teachers. So, when it comes to the children's population, we deal a lot with grief, but then also just, different types of crisis events, such as, large scale, when we talk about natural disasters, when those things happen, often there's a lot of questions that come with that. Are just those type of events that we would consider crisis that are covered a lot by social media or the news.
Yeah.
And what we found is that, with that, so for instance, there was a study done and it started shortly after 9/11 and continued on until current day. And what they found as they were, asking people who across the nation who had been present, but then also who had not been present, but had been watching the news in repeat and watching all of those images, those individuals that weren't present experienced the same amount of trauma and trauma symptoms as those who were present. So it just goes to show that, even if we're not present, sometimes those conversations and what children are exposed to can really have a major effect on mental health.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's start off talking about early childhood. So from birth to about 4 years old, 5 through preschool, what can you tell us about how you would approach early childhood students when dealing with tough topics?
So actually the child's age, so a child being very young, being in the preschool to, elementary, early elementary, kindergarten, that's actually a protective factor because they may not have that awareness of, the occurrence of an event, or they may not have those preconceived notions. They have not often experienced some of the events that we have as adults, or that some of our older students have experienced. So, like I said, it could be a very protective factor in that we wouldn't necessarily be introducing topics that could potentially be harmful if they're just not aware and not going to be made aware until that age where they're able to understand and have a valuable conversation on that. However, sometimes, things do happen. And so that children are exposed to. And so a lot of times they're going to be asking adults a lot of questions. This is teachers, it could be, social workers or counselors. It could be their parents. And so what's important is to, as we're talking with children, is to really sit down with them and find out first what they know. We don't want to make any assumptions of what they know and what they think happened. We're going to allow them to kind of ask those questions first. And then we want to be sure that we're really just responding to that question, that we're not going overboard with detail or with information that they may not be aware of, or like I said, with the detail, like providing gory details or something that, may be shocking or harmful. So it's really allowing them to lead that. The other thing is we also want to make sure, in those situations where they may be asking, am I safe? Would this happen to me? That we're providing that reassurance and we're affirming safety. So I know in part of the process when there have been school shootings, many families have talked about sitting down with their children and stating, like, here's what the school's doing to keep you safe. Here's what we're doing to keep you safe, and just reassuring that safety for them. But it's important not to completely shy away. So because sometimes there's some discomfort for us to answer those questions, it's important though to allow them to have the opportunity to ask those questions and get those answers.
Yeah.
For too long. So there's times where we may have to distract, or if we don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. But we also want to really encourage that healthy coping. So when we see them doing things that are helpful and helping them, overcome, whether it's grief or just helping to regulate during some of those, experiences that they may have in their young childhood, but really just acknowledging when they're really taking on those healthy coping skills.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to start to talk about a little bit about elementary. So as Stephanie kind of said in the intro, the older they get, the more they're exposed to, because they're able to read and write, and they develop more and deeper relationships with peers. And so it may not just be if their grandparent, for example, were to pass away, but it may be the grandparent of their best friend. And so them kind of experiencing that with their friends or classmate or whoever it may be. So that larger exposure really leads to those conversations being more often and more frequent and greater. And we need to realize that all kids don't have the privilege not to dive into certain topics, right? So, a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want my child to talk about race. But for students of color, that is their lived existence, right? So things may happen to them because of their race. And so it's not something that they can just ignore, right? We can't keep people in a bubble, so to speak. So we have to realize that that's a thing. And we need to be able to provide those students opportunities to express if they've had a negative encounter based on something like that, be it gender, race, religion, any element of diversity, for example, giving them the opportunity to express how they feel about that, with their parent or guardian, with their social worker, their counselor, whoever it may be, not kind of tampering down that, because like Stephanie said, sometimes if it makes us uncomfortable, then we don't want to talk about it, but that's really not helping the students. So we really need to keep that in mind as well. A really good tip for elementary age kids is making it situation based, right? So incidents that may happen on the playground, at Chuck E. Cheese, at wherever you may spend your time, those are the best ways to engage in conversations, because then it's not really abstract, right? It's not really something that may or may not happen, and it may happen over there, but not over here. so to speak. So when things happen and children are curious, like Stephanie said, and ask those questions, really taking the time in that moment, if you can, to engage in those conversations, right? And really saying, yeah, that's a great question, and this is what happens, and this is why. But what's the saying? Keep it simple, stupid, right? And so you wanna keep it at an elementary level. You know, you don't want to go into the. Oftentimes in adult conversations, we'll go into the facts, and then we'll follow it with a whole lot of opinion based on our life experiences. But we want them to be able to have their own life experiences. So we just want to tell them the facts. And remembering that a lot of times the innocence of childhood helps us to be able to understand things a little easier, right? So a personal story, I lost my brother to leukemia when I was 10 years old. And it was very easy for me to understand. He got sick, he died. We're Christians, so I was told that he goes to heaven. That was it. There wasn't a lot of questioning about that. Why that have to happen was the overarching question. And I'm sad about that. But all the extra things I really didn't think of. Fast forward to when I was 25 and my mother died, whole different experience, because then I had a whole lot of more questions, right? Questioning a lot of things and really just digging down. It wasn't as simple as somebody got sick, somebody died, somebody went to heaven, right? And so taking advantage of the fact that, being able to keep it simple and then allowing them to ask the questions as you go into more detail, to see if you need to go into more detail. And then creating a safe space. So don't hush kids that are curious, right? Again, you don't want to push them out just because you may not want to answer a question. For example, oftentimes students who are young, kids who are young may point out something that is quote unquote taboo or not politically correct to point out with adults, right? So they may point out race, they may point out gender, they may point out if somebody has on a certain religious garb, or if somebody is utilizing a wheelchair, they may point that out. And oftentimes you'll be in the grocery store, you'll hear a kid do that, and the parent is like, shh, don't say that, that's rude. You know what I mean? You ever say that? And that sends the message to the child that it's not okay to be curious, or that something is bad with the fact that the person is different from them. And we don't want to do that. We want to have that conversation. Yes, some people are in wheelchairs. Some people are born, they're always in wheelchairs. Some people have accidents and they're in wheelchairs. Some people have sicknesses and they end up in wheelchairs. You can talk about any of things that people can do. People in wheelchairs can still do 5Ks, and just the list goes on and on, different ways you can spend the conversation. But just a real big tip is don't kind of pounce on them in a negative way when they have those questions and that curiosity. So now we want to talk a little bit about teens, and
Yes.
this is where it gets a little more intense, right? Because they for sure have the questions, right?
Right. And I like that we kind of ended with the children on just acknowledging those statements, not hushing, because what eventually happens, and what we have found through research, is that most kids, about 70% of students, children in general, if they're going on to do a quick Google search for a book report or something that they're doing, there's a high chance, especially if they're not like within the school environment where there's certain, protection put in place as far as search words and things like that. But even with that, sometimes things can pop up. And it's very often that students, like teenagers, those that are on the internet, will come across something that's, we would consider inappropriate or inappropriate images. And 70% of them will not speak to an adult about that. And a lot of students and children will describe that as scary. They will describe that as like, I didn't know what I was looking at. Sometimes they will turn to other students to get an explanation or information, but we really want them coming to their parents. We want them going to an adult. That
Yeah,
would be
yeah, I think that's great. And I want to just hop up in there to say the thing is too, we want them to have that trust, because oftentimes if they don't and they have questions and they think they'll get in trouble because they searched something
that's
and
why,
something popped up, and then they're like, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble. So then they don't
right,
talk, right? And so they're just
right.
asking amongst each other, and that may not always be great too. So that's a good point.
Right. Or they'll start to try to answer it for themselves. And then they're doing additional searching on that. And then
Mhm.
they've really gone down then a path of being exposed to things that, once again, um, as a parent, we would like to be able to have that conversation before they're being exposed to that through friends. And I know with the advent of social media and the internet, although there's a lot of, great things about that, about social media and technology, that is, there's also that downside or that dark side of that. And once again, going back to my first statement of, sometimes our kids are learning about things before we as parents even are notified of that. So news, if they're on social media and somebody's tweeting something,
Mhm.
or there's a TikTok thing out there, and I know that there's often been a lot of discussion on just individuals having access to TikTok videos that haven't been removed yet, and just the devastation that that can have. And so it's really important as we talk about social media. It's really easy as parents, we can just take it away or lock their phone. However, we're not really helping them learn how to regulate. So of course we want to have parameters around that. We want to have structure around the use of technology for their safety, but also starting to work with them on helping to identify when I'm starting to get anxious while I'm, perusing social media, when I'm starting to get depressed or sad because, I'm just inundated with images that are just overwhelming, or if I'm getting scared or worried, and being in touch with that internal feeling and making then the decision like, okay, like I need to get off and go do something else, or I need to change, what I'm doing, and just having that awareness of how to cope with it. Because as we know, technology moves so fast. It's really tough for us to keep up with it. And the images now occur so quickly for our kids that before we can even
Mhm.
click them out of something, it's already in their minds. And so we really want to make sure that, number one, they have that trust that they can come and talk to us if there's something they've been exposed to, but also they're, especially as like our high schoolers, they're really starting to develop that internal awareness of, I need to regulate my own social media and technology use. And how do I do that? And what other things are there out there that aren't on a phone or on a computer or on a tablet? And so whether it's with social media or just those, difficult conversations about loss, grief, or, peer issues, even, that dialogue is so important to have that conversation. And once again, really leading that with this, with your child. But we often, and I really like this, somebody had brought up at one point, like having that conversation of, is this something where you really need me to listen, or is this something where you're really wanting me to help you fix it or give you some advice, and being very clear on that. But it's also important to clarify facts. If sometimes, with the internet, misinformation goes around very quickly.
Mhm.
And so helping them understand how they can really clarify and identify factual information. Also, similarly, providing that reassurance to them if it's something where there's been a loss, or, for instance, I was recently meeting with somebody who had lost a friend, and it was actually to childhood cancer. And we know, as devastating as it is, it's technically still very rare. And so really just kind of clarifying the factual information around there, because they were really concerned that they or their sibling would experience
Mhm.
that. And just, once again, that anxiety was preventing them from functioning in different environments. And so really clarifying that, and then also supporting healthy coping skills, because especially as a teenager, they're at a high risk of picking those coping skills that may not be healthy. So that's when we start to see either risk taking or impulsive behaviors. Substance use now is a bigger thing as for our teenagers versus younger children. They have more freedom and more independence, and so there's more choices out there. And so we really want to support healthy coping, and then redirect anything that we may see as unhealthy, or make referrals as needed. But once again, we're asking, as they ask questions, we're providing direct information, and we're really trying to, help them, prepare for the next step in life, which, I know you're going to talk a little bit about that college setting, Terry, but that's really what it's about is, they're not too far from independence at that age. And so we're not going to be there to always protect them from this information. And so how can we help them start to learn the skill set to put some protections in place, but also some supports in place so that they do well with that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. I think another point to think about too is a lot of times we don't want to have these conversations, not just because they make us uncomfortable, but because we are not confident in our level of knowledge, right? So I've talked to many parents who say, I know these issues are important and I want my kids to be knowledgeable and aware, but I don't feel that I'm knowledgeable enough and aware enough. So just thinking about that and sitting in that and realizing that can't stop you, right? So what you have to do is say, hey, I don't know a lot about grief. Maybe I haven't experienced a lot. Maybe you haven't experienced a lot of grief, right? Like Stephanie was talking about, but that doesn't mean that you can't, with your child, learn together, right? So what books about grief are good and helpful? What books about whatever topic that may make you nervous because you're not confident in your knowledge level, learn together. There's nothing wrong with that. I worked for 16 years in the collegiate setting, and one of the biggest complaints, especially from freshmen, right? So it would be close to our age of our seniors over at Carmel High, was that people who were teaching their classes, their professors would ignore subjects, right? And so when I would circle back to those professors, it would be, I am supposed to be the thought leader, the expert, the this, the that. And so if I don't know a lot about a subject, I'm just not going to engage in it. And what would happen was the students would then make assumptions about that. They would make assumptions that the person didn't care about the topic, that they didn't think it was important, that they had certain beliefs that were hateful. And none of that was true, but they were left to just kind of guess, right? And so instead of just saying, hey, this is not a subject that I know a lot about, but what can we do to learn together, would have worked a lot better. So that's just something to think about. It's going to come up. We can't shelter our kids forever. We would love for them to stay 5 in kindergarten forever, right? In some cases, but it doesn't work like that. So being able to grow with them and learn with them. Being a child today is not the same as when I was a child. Totally different. We didn't have, access to the world in the palm of our hands. We just didn't have that. When we had internet, it was with the disc and dial up. And I'm dating myself, but that's what it was, right? And that was not, even then, that was really not a source of information. So we kind of had to utilize those adults, right? But now they don't necessarily have to. So you want to create an environment where they want to, right? So that's important to remember. And then as Stephanie started to talk about preparing our students for the next step, as I said, coming out of the collegiate environment, it's expected that students are able to hold conversations on these topics and do so in a respectful manner and still being honest about thoughts and facts and feelings, but being able to have engage in dialogue that is on topics that aren't rainbows and kitties, right? You're in college. There is a plethora of topics and it's not all pretty. And so there's an expectation that you're able to engage in that kind of civil discourse across difference, across any age, any major, whatever it may be. That's just a set expectation. That's just how it is. So we will be doing our students an injustice if we don't prepare them as both the school system and as parents and caregivers for that next step, if that's something they want to do. And even if they don't go to college, the workforce, you go into a professional setting and there's certain standards and expectations that are just there. and I would hate for our students to have this great caramel education, then go to college or the workforce and have issues because of something like that, something that we could avoid, right? And so that's why we have things like we're having today and having these conversations to equip, parents and caregivers and community members and staff members, all with that knowledge in order to best help our students to learn. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions that you want asked, you can hop in the Q&A feature and ask those questions through that mechanism. Stephanie, what do you think is one of the toughest topics to talk about with kids?
It really depends on the kid. And sometimes it also depends on the event as well, because sometimes the events, especially when it's like a crisis event where somebody was harmed, especially when a young person was harmed. So I would say like close family members or, our friends or peers, because in our minds, the cycle of life, it's when somebody young has passed or has been injured, it's very devastating because in our heads, it's not supposed to happen like that. It's supposed to be, as we get older, as we age, things take place at a certain, place and time. I think sometimes too, those things that we can't prepare for. So I always look at what's the severity, and then also, how much do we know about it before it happens? So when you talk about events where there was very little forewarning, so looking at, whether it's natural disaster or, events of violence, that can be very concerning because there's not a lot of time to prepare. So, talking about something where like, active shooter type of situation versus a hurricane where, a couple days beforehand, we recognize the weather may be bad. We're boarding up houses. Some people are able to leave. There's a lot more like of a heads up and a lot more discussion. But then also just the severity of it too. Are there injuries involved? Death involved? Those type of images can be very difficult. And so I definitely also think that it has to do with the adult level of competence and confidence talking about some of these situations. As you said, sometimes I get a lot of questions about grief. So somebody may be very comfortable talking about other things, such as inappropriate images, but may really struggle with talking about grief. And so I really think it just depends on the child, and then also just the level of comfort, from those responding. They may experience it differently.
Yeah, that makes sense. I really especially like that point about what we may be comfortable with, right? And so if I have a person who have gone through a lot of grief, and maybe that's a sore spot with me, then I kind of bring my own internal struggles into that conversation with that young person, and that can be difficult as well. All right, we have a question. It says, what's the best way to handle if friends or family approach I'm going to start that again. What's the best way to handle if friends or family approach a different topic differently than the parents?
That's a great question. So for me, my son entered kindergarten this year, but prior to that, my parents were very much assisting with his upbringing. And so they had a big influence. And of course, that's the prime time for discussions about death and dying. And they have all those questions about really difficult topics. And so I think it's important to have that understanding of, as the parent would like to respond to these questions. So I would appreciate if you get those questions, just, bring it back to me. I know that's something we also work with, with our teachers. So when it comes to grief and things like that, when we talk about how to respond, and if you get questions that, it may be, it's something that really a parent should be responding to, how to redirect that, and then follow up to ensure that the parents also have a heads up that they may be getting that question.
The second part of what she said was, if there's a root personal philosophical difference that leads to a difference in approach, and they tell your child something you disagree with, I think that's a wonderful opportunity to talk about the fact that people have different feelings and thoughts and beliefs, right?
Right.
And so absolutely. And they'll encounter that their entire life in and out of school. So just having that conversation and being like, oh, Uncle Billy said such and such. Well, Uncle Billy and I grew up in the same house, and guess what? I don't feel that way at all. Right. So helping them to make clear how many of you, listening, have a sibling that you are just on total ends of the spectrum on all types of different beliefs and things. I know I certainly
It makes
do.
Thanksgiving interesting.
Right. Real fun next week, right?
Right.
But that's a great question, because that's a great opportunity to say that, hey, this is what I believe. This is what I believe based on my value system, maybe based on my religious background, whatever it may be. And this is what I think is right. And this is what I'm trying to instill in you, because I think that it's the right thing. And I'm trying to do the best by you that I can as your parent. But keeping in mind that we're all different and everybody's entitled to their own thoughts and feelings and beliefs. The only thing they're not entitled to is to try to belittle or degrade somebody because they may feel or think or believe differently. So that was a great question. That was definitely right on time for for family gatherings, right?
Right.
We have a couple more. Yay. Okay. So somebody says, do you have any suggestions for talking with teens on tough topics when they say they don't want to talk about it, but it's obviously affecting them? Really good question.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
And I think there's different ways to approach that. And I think one way to approach it is by acknowledging like what you see. So how it's affecting them. Like I see that you've been saying to yourself a lot, or I see that you've been, like your energy seems low. Seems like something's on your mind. I just want you to know that I'm here to listen when you're ready to talk, or if you're ready to talk. Even offering like, would you, as especially with our teenagers, they may have a parent that they provide more information to, or a relative, or, an adult that they have a close relationship with. And it may be, would you like to talk to your dad more about that? Or would you like to, and offering, that opportunity, if it's like, I want to talk about it. I just don't want to talk to you about this, Mom, because it might be embarrassing, or it might be, And so I think giving them that, I'm here to listen. And I think even acknowledging, so like, if maybe this topic has been brought up and your response or reaction, was a knee-jerk one that you're not, that you necessarily have recognized maybe wasn't the best response, acknowledging that too. Like, I know last time you brought this up, I gave you a lot about my opinion. Since thinking about it, I wish I would have just listened. And I want you to know, I'm going to do better this time. So when you're ready to talk about it, I'm here for you. And giving them that opportunity and ability to do that.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good stuff. I've read some articles about the importance of aunties and uncles, and even your play aunties and play uncles, or like your parents' childhood friends they grew up with. But those people who, like you said, they may feel slightly more comfortable having what they would consider an awkward conversation, with their parents, inside their house. So, making sure that you are surrounding yourself with that village, right? So who are some alternatives that if my child is not comfortable in talking to me about this, well, maybe they'll go to my best friend who I know loves them like they're their own, right? So that village is really important. I think another thing is I used to do foster care, and something that worked well with preteens and teens were giving them the opportunity to write about it, right? So, and actually learned that from a foster child I used to have. There would be something wrong, you would inquire, and so you didn't really want to, keep asking, right? Because that doesn't help either. But she would start to write notes. And she would wait until I was in bed. Then she would slip them under my door. And usually I was still awake. The door was just closed. And I would read them. And then I would say, hey, I got this note. Is it okay to talk about it? And that was okay because it was kind of the lead in. You know what I mean? I already had read some of what she was thinking, and she didn't necessarily have to verbalize it, but I still already knew. So it was easier to engage in that conversation. So it's really about the child, and your child, right? And so just thinking about what may be best for them, maybe journaling, maybe keeping some type of diary, be it electronic or old school with the little lock and key, right? whatever it may be that works for them to kind of get that conversation started, and then maybe they'll feel more comfortable in sharing.
Right. And I know a lot of families do family journaling. So they may have one journal and they can write, different things to each other and, kind of discuss it later on. So that's a great idea.
Yes. Okay. We have some more. Great. Love the participation. Here's a tough topic. Your kid is worried about retaliation from other kids if they report or discuss a bullying or mean event that happened to them. I know about the Stop It app. However, how can you help your kids to open up and realize they are safe and retaliation is not okay? I think that's a great question. I think one thing that's important to know is that, you have to be realistic with kids, right? And so we can have all the non-harassment, non-bullying rules and regulations in place in the world, in the school system, in a job situation, in the military, and whatever it may be. But people are people, and people are going to people, right? And so sometimes that means that they're going to do bad things. So letting them know that there is mechanisms in place, but letting them know that you understand that sometimes things will still happen, and not guaranteeing them that things won't happen. I think one of the worst things that we can do is to tell a child, well, that'll never happen, because then it happens, and then the trust is broken between you and them. So just being really careful with that, and making sure that they know that, sometimes things happen, but I want you to be comfortable to come to talk to me so that we can work through it together. That's the other part of that. You never want your students to feel like they're in something alone. You want them to know that they have you. They have whatever village is connected to you. They have their teachers, their social workers, their administrators. They have people in their corner to help them to get through situations and to rectify wrongs that are done to them. So that's what I would say. And just flat out calling a spade a spade. This behavior is wrong, and you are justified in feeling some type of way about it. I think that that's really, really important as well. The next question is, what are some steps parents can take, or what are resources parents can use to increase their own knowledge about tough topics? That is our next section, right? Talking about resources. So Stephanie, you want to talk a little bit about Common Sense Media?
Yeah, so Common Sense Media is a great tool. If you Google Common Sense Media, it's a great one, especially with technology and social media. So there's lots of great tools for parents. It talks about apps you can use to monitor, ways that you can set things so that there's more security there. But there's also one tool that I really like is they have a technology contract where they kind of go through those steps of what are expectations as a household, but then also what are going to be like, what are things that might be a trigger for you or maybe difficult for you where you need to reach out to us. What are our plans for addressing those things as they come up? But it's a really great plan. And they also have things like just parent reviews of every book, movies, music. And so, as we know, you never know what the new catchphrase or, lingo is from our teenagers. So if you're wanting, if you heard something, if you've seen something, you can always go on there, find out more information about what that is. So it's a really nice community for parents. It really talks about the mental health behind technology, but then also just safety with technology. But then there's also things, I know the National Association or the National Association of Psychologists, I think that's of school psychologists, sorry, NAS. They have great talking points for addressing all different types of situations, from grief, bereavement to exposure to inappropriate images to, violence and other types of topics. So that's usually my go-to. I think they do an excellent job of really, putting that in bullet points and making it very easy to follow and to really navigate some of those conversations.
Great. The next question we have is, do you have any suggestions on how to discuss addictions or alcoholism with elementary schoolers and early middle school age children? I really like this question. In a former life, I did this for a living. Early in my professional career, I was a prevention specialist for an alcoholism council in a major Midwest city. And what we really had success with was focusing on the impact that it had on that child, right? And so saying, a lot of times these kids would be in situations where they would miss school, or they'd be late to school, or they'd be tired in school, whatever it may be, because they were working to take care of their younger brothers and sisters, right? Because of alcoholism issues or addiction issues in the family. So really focusing on the impact that it has on them. Really talking about it from the disease model, and not focusing on kind of make it as the person is a bad person or an evil person. I will share with you that when I was growing up, I had an uncle who was an alcoholic and a drug addict. And he struggled with addiction for many, many years. He beat it at the end. His last few years of living, he died a couple years ago, but he really struggled. And so did his wife, to the point where my grandparents raised my cousins. And so to me, alcohol was evil. Alcohol was the devil, right? And so I felt that way, and I never drunk. I did not drink in college. I did not drink in high school. I did not drink. I didn't even toast at weddings. Like, I just was like, not happening. But then my first professional job, as I said, was at an alcoholism council, and I learned about the disease of addiction, right? And I worked with kids and helped explain it to them, and it put a whole new spin on it, that I didn't have to think that people were evil because they were taking alcohol. And thinking back on it now, I was like, that was a little extreme, but that was not for me and for anybody who's going to be around me, right? So really focusing on, one, the impact on that student, and then two, the fact that it doesn't make a person evil. Stephanie, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and I will say we often find too that with some children, it's very difficult for them to acknowledge or to verbalize or discuss how it affects them personally. So sometimes even, and there are children's books out there where they discuss just different difficult topics, including addiction. And sometimes it's okay to have that conversation of, how do you think that character felt when this happened? How do you think that character coped with that? What were some of the struggles? What do you think, that character may struggle with? Because whether or not the book itself is explicit about that, it will help them start to process out their own feelings about it. But it's safer to talk about that character versus talking about how it affects me directly. And so sometimes, identifying some of those books and reading those books together and then having that discussion afterwards can help get that process going and help them discuss or even write, what that experience is like for them.
Absolutely. We used a lot of puppets with the young kids. We have another question that says, we want our teenage children to develop their own ideas and beliefs about some of the more common tough topics with support from their parents. What advice do you have for when teens ask, what do you think about this, mom or dad? Do you have any ideas for encouraging the conversation without forcing a personal opinion on them? I think that is a wonderful question. I'll start off. I will say that, kind of like we talked about earlier, it's okay to share your opinion with them, but letting them know, this is my opinion, these are my values, this is what I think, and this is how I'm raising you because I think it's the best. But I fully understand that other people think differently and that you are another person. Right? So you may be my child and I love you, but that doesn't mean that you have to believe and do every single thing that I believe and do. Now, that may be hard for some parents to hear, right? Myself included. I am a parent of 3, but it's the reality, and you want to make sure that they understand that, because what you don't want to happen is your student feeling that they can't really talk to you after they've asked you about what you think about something, and you've gone off on a tangent and you've talked about how evil other people are or disgusting other people are, whatever the descriptor may be, and that child may be that other person, right? And so that's really, really important to remember. And I have worked with many, many, many students in the collegiate setting who came right out of high school and then had very tough relationships with their parents because of just that, right? They were very anti whatever my identity is. And so now that I'm away, I'm going to put some incredible distance between us, because I never felt like that I could really talk to them, because they didn't just share their opinion and their thoughts and their values. They made me feel like I was a bad person because mine may have been different. So I would caution against that. You never want to do anything that's going to completely alienate your children. Of course, you want to let them know what you think is best, right? You're their parent. Like, this is part of your job description, right? But you want to do it in a way that's loving and affirming, and letting them know that if they feel differently than you, then that is completely that's not going to erase your love for them, if that makes sense. Stephanie, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, this actually came up for me this morning with my son as he was getting ready for school, and it was funny because before you have kids, like, I felt like my husband and I, we were pretty much aligned. We felt like we had everything ironed out, and we knew how we were going to raise our kid, But I think, though, what we've come to notice is that there are sometimes some differences, and so sometimes we will talk about, like, dad thinks this, mom thinks that, and here's why. We're not completely on opposite sides there, but sometimes there may be just different ways that we might deal with conflict, or there may be different viewpoints on even smaller topics. And so even talking about, like, we live together in the same household, we're married, and we still have some differences there. And so it's important that we're respectful with that. And also, just kind of talking about how, even as we instill those values, there still be maybe some change in some individualized beliefs as he gets older.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And letting him know from the beginning. I know your son is just turned 6, so he's young. Letting him know that from the beginning is really important, so that he grows up and he's not 16 questioning if it's okay to feel different than you and your husband, right? He knows that it's okay to feel different. In relation to specifically diversity related resources, I would echo Stephanie in saying that books are a great resource, again, because it doesn't have to be them telling their story and their feelings initially. It can be, let's talk about this character in this book, and that helps children process a lot. Sesame Street does a lot of specials on tough topics. They even have one on how to talk to kids about tough topics, actually. So they have a lot of great resources that I would recommend checking them out. Their webpage, they have an Instagram page where they promote all their different specials and things like that. I've seen a few of them, and they're really good. And they're puppets, right? And so it makes it a lot less scary. And it's okay if Ernie did it and I can do it too, right? Kind of that friendly face, and the information coming from that friendly face, I think is important as well. So that is the end of our kind of outline and points that we wanted to share. Thanks so much for all that participation. We'll give it another minute and see if anybody types any additional questions into the Q&A. In the meantime, Stephanie, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just want to, once again, like you said, thank you so much. I think, once again, this is a topic we get a lot of questions about. And once again, you have different developmental ages. And I will even tell you, I've been a children's therapist for quite a while now, and have worked with children through various difficult situations. And as a parent, it's much different. And sometimes it's hard to think in the moment and respond in the moment. And so please know, we're here to support you. If you ever need those resources or, would like linkage to other resources, that's what we're here for. We want to be a support and a resource.
Absolutely. We definitely want to be a support and a resource for you. Also utilizing your people inside your building. And then I just want to end with saying, give yourself compassion and give yourself grace, right? We're not always going to get it right. I'm a parent as well. We're not always going to get it right. We're not always going to get it right the first time, the second time, the third time, right? But that's okay. We're doing the best that we can. Utilize the CCS resources, utilize your own personal village, and have compassion for yourself. We're all working through it. I'm sure that when we thought maybe we would have kids a long time ago, that we didn't imagine the world would be the way it is now, right? So, dealing with it, like I said before, it's not like when we were growing up. So just being okay with that and knowing that you'll make mistakes, and one day your kid will be like you're the best, the next day you're the worst. But that's just a part of parenting, and that's not a reflection on your love for your student. So again, thank you so much. Appreciate the questions and the participation. Feel free to reach out to Stephanie and I if you ever need anything. Have a great night.